community sector. This is a good development. In my own department, the new Strategy and Delivery Division is breaking new ground and creating teams of diverse policy officers to produce high-quality, collaborative, evidence-based work. Nevertheless, the 2007-8 State of the Service report showed that the APS is still far from having a culture of innovation. More than half of APS employees surveyed were ambivalent about whether new ideas were encouraged in their workplace. The vast majority said they were keen to try out new ideas, but many felt they had limited support to take them forward. This needs to change. A second area in which the APS must renew its efforts is in the delivery of citizen-centred services. The relative success of Centrelink and Medicare in delivering frontline services focused on the customer is testimony to how far the APS has come in this field compared to 30 years ago. But we need to go further. We need to create more customer-friendly services and make more services available through single locations. Not only does the APS need to know more about what customers of public services want, but it also has to do more to feed that knowledge back to policymakers. In 2007-8, only 54% of APS employees thought their agency had good feedback mechanisms in place between service delivery and policy development areas. This too must change. Third, there is a clear need for stronger collective identity within the APS. In 2007-8, only 40% of SES employees, that is the leadership group of the public service, saw themselves as part of an APS leadership group, rather than simply as leaders of an individual agency. What is more, if public servants are to see themselves as part of one Australian public service, and if the APS is to be more flexible and agile, mobility rates across agencies must improve. Only 3% of APS employees moved between agencies in 07-08, according to the State of the Service report. Movement between the APS and external employers is higher, but it is still far too low. There are still too many impediments and disincentives for employees moving between agencies or between jurisdictions. This kind of mobility must be encouraged to enrich the ability of individual public servants to provide cross-cutting advice, including on matters that transcend Commonwealth, state and territory boundaries and international boundaries. Finally, and critically, the APS must renew itself through investment in its greatest asset, its people. This is particularly urgent when the proportion of the APS workforce aged over 55 has doubled over the past 12 years, when more than 70% of SES employees will be eligible for retirement over the next 10 years, and when, as the audit officers pointed out, the APS faces a big challenge to attract and to retain talented staff. To overcome that challenge, the APS needs to invest more in developing the right people. Last year, 3/4 of agencies that were able to estimate their expenditure on learning and development said that they invested less than 2% of their budgets in their people. Of those, 39% of agencies reported that they spent less than 1% of their budget on learning and development. And in 2007-8, fewer than 1 in 3 APS employees rated the effectiveness of their learning and development as high or very high in terms of helping them to improve their performance. These figures are just not good enough for a professional public service. This too must change. I believe the next stage of renewal, of reform for the APS requires more than just piecemeal change. We need a more sweeping reform driven by a long-range blueprint for a world-class 21st century public service. That's why I'm pleased to announce today that the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Terry Moran, will be establishing and leading an advisory group to develop a blueprint for reform for the APS for the future. The work of the advisory group will proceed in 2 parts. First, the group will oversee the completion of an international benchmarking exercise to compare Australian performance with leading bureaucracies around the world. That is because the APS needs to know and be honest about its current performance, its strengths and its weaknesses, so that it can understand how it can improve. Second, the advisory group will use the benchmarking study, along with other inputs, to develop a blueprint for reform. As part of the development of the blueprint, the advisory group will seek the input of the APS itself, the broader community, about the APS's future and possible reform directions. Before the end of this month, Mr Moran will convene the advisory group and release a discussion paper seeking public and APS input. When that happens, I encourage you all to let the advisory group know what you think about the future of the APS. Your input as practitioners or as observers is critical. By early next year, the group will advise the Cabinet Secretary and myself on further steps we need to take to rejuvenate the APS. The group will consider reform of the internal structures of the APS to ensure it provides the best policy advice to government. And importantly, it will assess the core challenge of how to strengthen service delivery and measurement, how to foster a greater sense of cohesion and esprit de corps across the APS, and how to attract and retain the best people from outside the public service, and how to make the most of that great talent once inside the public service. A specific priority will be a renewed and major investment in education and development of staff in order to build strategic leadership across the APS. To enhance the capabilities of the APS and its future leaders, we will need a renewed focus on learning and development in the public service and on building close relationships with experts across the community. This may mean forming new relationships with universities, industry, or other non-governmental organisations. It may mean government working closely with existing institutions or creating new institutions to build public service capabilities for the 21st century. As I said in my address to Berkman College at the Australian National University last week, for too long in Australia, thick walls have existed between places of research and learning and places of policy making and implementation. Those thick walls do not enhance either the quality of public administration or, for that matter, the quality of academia. It's time to bring those walls down. They are in stark contrast with the United States, where the flow of experts between government and academia sharpens expertise in both. The Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University exemplifies this approach. Formed in the 1930s on the back of the Great Depression, the Kennedy School is now a collection of eminent social science research institutions, comprised of 15 institutes and research centres and over 30 executive education and degree programs. Together, these institutions draw on the resources of the entire university to make the school a centre for training enlightened public leaders that attract some of the best students from across the world. At its core, this approach is the inspiration of both the Crawford School here in Canberra at the ANU and ANSOG across Australia and New Zealand. That said, I believe it is time for us to think about how we can strengthen our approach here from what we have done in the past. We should aspire to build a uniquely local version of what the Kennedy School has achieved in the United States. I'm in the market for ways we can improve how public institutions relate here, so we can make the most of the great talent we have in Australia, wherever that talent exists. Like the approach of the Kennedy School, our arrangements must equip the future public service to excel at policy analysis and advice, as well as in public sector leadership. They must also increase the depth of public policy knowledge on which we can draw to tackle the most challenging problems of the future. Any new relationship or institution in Australia would need to recognise and build on the strengths of that which already exists. The Crawford School of Economics and Government at the ANU has already built an enviable reputation as a centre of public policy research and excellence. I'm proud that the Secretary of my own department, Terry Moran, is on the Advisory Council. This demonstrates the Australian Government's commitment to this endeavour. It is clear that we have one of the foundation stones for an Australian version of the Kennedy approach in the Crawford School and its network of research institutes across the university. Importantly, Crawford has built extensive international networks and linkages that bring students from other parts of the world to Australia and encourage greater Asia literacy and global understanding in the Australian public policy community, and we need to strengthen that role. Another foundation stone for an Australian version of the Kennedy approach is ANSOG. Through ANSOG, Australia has built a unique public policy and public sector management institution with relevant and useful international linkages. It recognises our close relationship with New Zealand, and it is a model uniquely adapted to the Australian federal system, bringing together a consortium of governments and universities from around the country and across the Tasman. As a result, Australia finally has high-quality public sector executive leadership training and development of a standard superior to most places in the world. ANSOG has shown that it is capable of delivering first-rate training for future leaders on a sufficient scale to underpin an improvement of overall public sector capability. The Australian National University is a critical part of the ANSOG undertaking and also a critical part of the life of our national capital. The ANU holds a special place as a strategic endowment for our nation. The Australian Government's vision for the ANU is to build on this national endowment. The ANU, under its charter, is a university of national and international significance in terms of its contributions to both policy development and analysis and in terms of training future leaders. For this reason, I believe it's time to reinvigorate the Commonwealth's relationship with the ANU and to create a new partnership between the public service, ANSOG, and the ANU. That relationship is, in my view, crucial to fostering the development of the next generation of public service leaders and ensuring government draws on the wealth of expertise that exists across the ANU and ANSOG networks. Part of this could potentially entail the ANU hosting a much enhanced and upgraded ANSOG presence through a new National Centre of Public Policy and Public Sector Management. Such a centre would focus on professional development. Public service executives could either access programs at the ANU or at one of the other university members of ANSOG closest to where they work. As part of this, the ANSOG Executive Master of Public Administration would become a key preparation for a role at the level of Senior Executive Service, Band 1. Other ANSOG programs could be tailored for those in more senior roles. For the ANU itself, this would mean a renewed emphasis on tapping the broader academic base for contributions to public policy through a new internal think tank or by other means. The challenge is great, but the possibilities equally are great. To conclude, the government's program of public service reform above all else is about our people, fostering a public service culture where there is a passion for public policy. People who recognise that there are few more important and rewarding professions that an Australian can follow than to forge public policy that will change and better the lives of all Australians. Like all contemporary institutions, the Australian Public Service is challenged by the sometimes bewildering pace of complex change. But the challenge of change has been a continuing feature of life for successive generations, right back to the Industrial Revolution. A generation ago, in 1976, the Coombs Commission noted, and I quote, that changing social attitudes in our time and the increasing tempo of technological change are widening the range and intensifying the complexity of the functions performed by governments and presenting them with a different pattern of characteristic problems. Many generations before that, in 1854, the Northcote-Trevelyan report warned of the great and increasing accumulation of public business and the consequent pressure upon government. It added that without a professional public service, the business of government of the day could not be carried on. Today's public service values many of the features of the public service ethos established as a result of reforms more than 150 years ago. But equally, it embraces change. Indeed, what marks the history of the public service is the productive tension between continuity and change. It is precisely those organisations with a strong sense of their stability and continuity, of the strength of their culture and of their values, that are best placed to make these changes. That, more than anything else, lies at the heart of my absolute confidence that the Australian public service can aspire to be and can in fact become the best public service in the world. I thank you.